Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today we're going to show you how to clean in this case a Glock. This is a Glock 43 that we just had out at the range, so look for a video on that. But this cleaning process can apply to most other pistols, especially other striker fired pistols. What we're going to do today is called a field strip cleaning. So we're going to take the gun apart to the minimum level necessary to clean it after what you would do after any range trip. So to start with, we of course want to make sure that our gun is unloaded, which this one is. And it's also good practice to make sure that there is no ammo anywhere in the area where you're cleaning the gun, especially no ammo that would fit this gun, and no loaded magazines. You don't want any mistakes to happen. So from a safety standpoint, make sure that everything is clear and all you've got here is cleaning equipment. So the first thing we'll do is talk about what's the minimum necessary to clean a Glock or other similar gun. Glocks happen to come with a cleaning rod and a brush. So you have this cleaning rod, it comes with every Glock, and they come with the nylon brush. Now, it's not a requirement that you use nylon only in a Glock. You can use the brass brushes. The advantage to nylon is that they're caliber insensitive, so one nylon brush will fit pretty much every caliber. So they can put the same nylon brush in every Glock box and not have to worry about it. So I'll show you that some of the things that you might want to have, also you'd want to have some sort of cleaning solvent. I happen to like the Outers nitro solvent. And some sort of general purpose gun oil. Now there's a number of different cleaning products on the market and all of them are effective. However, some of them are not necessarily compatible with each other. So some of the water-based cleaning compounds like Ballistol don't play nicely with oil-based. Doesn't make either one of them better than the other, just if you want to stick with one type of chemistry. So if you're going to use oil-based, use all oil-based, and if you're going to use water-based, stick completely water-based. A few of the other things that you may want to have would be some toothbrush-style brushes. This is a nylon one, and this particular one is bronze. Avoid stainless steel. You don't want any type of steel brushes. A bronze brush for the barrel and chamber. Now with the bronze brushes or any of the other non-nylon brushes, they are caliber specific. So this is a 9mm/38 one, and another unique thing about this is that the core of this is bronze as opposed to steel. So in the event that the rim of the core strikes the chamber or it gets worn down and the core hits the barrel, it's not going to scratch it. It's softer than the steel that the barrel's made out of. In the case of a Glock, you may want a Glock Takedown Tool for when you go into a detail strip. This tool, one tool, you can completely take apart a Glock. And a precision oiler does come in handy. Now this is a oil-based Teflon precision oiler. And another cleaning rod and a pick could come out to be a fairly handy combination. So, and of course, don't forget, you need some patches. Now these are 16 gauge/12 gauge shotgun patches, and these are 38/45. I tend to like the bigger patches. You get a little bit more tension against the barrel and a little bit better cleaning, but either one will work. With a shorter barrel, you don't really have to worry about the patch getting stuck in the barrel. So let me clear away a few of these extra things. Make the field a little bit cleaner. So the first thing you want to do, as soon as possible in the cleaning process, you want to get the firearm disassembled. Get it into an inoperative state. You've already confirmed it's unloaded, but we want to make sure that this firearm is disassembled, non-operative, so we don't have to worry about any sorts of risks. So with a Glock, confirm it's clear, and with a Glock you do have to pull the trigger. So notice I pointed it in a safe direction away from me and pulled the trigger after confirming it was empty. Some of the others, like the Springfield and the Walther PPQ, you don't have to pull the trigger. When you rotate the takedown lever, it pulls the trigger mechanism out of the way. On a Glock, you do have to pull the trigger, and you have to pull the slide back just a hair to operate these takedown levers. There's one on either side of the gun. So the easiest way to do that is to grip the gun with your right hand, with your thumb around it, put your hand over the top of the slide, and just close your hand a little bit. And you'll notice all I did is move the slide maybe 1/8 of an inch. I'm not moving it much. You don't want to pull it all the way back and re-engage the trigger. What you're just doing is trying to take tension off of a plate that's up here. Once you do that, reach up with your fingers and pull down on both of these tabs, push the barrel forward. And now you've disassembled the Glock. Now there is a tool on the market that can grip those little takedown levers if you're having a hard time with your hands getting a hold of them. On the smaller guns, they seem to be fairly easy to grip. For some reason on the large frame like the 29 and the 30, they're sometimes a little harder to get a hold of. Once you've got the gun apart, you can now either just set it aside, and usually what I'll do is I'll just clean the tops of the magazines. You want to clean the followers of the magazines. So open up our cleaning solvent. And by the way, it's a good idea to keep the various chemicals closed until you're ready to use that specific chemical. That way if you kind of moving your hand around and you accidentally knock one over, you're not going to be spilling stuff all over your work area. And what I tend to do is I just put the patch over it, close it with my finger and tip it upside down. And I'll do that in a couple locations on the patch to wet the patch. You can see I'm picking up liquid. So the patch has got solvent on it, but it's not spilling all over the place. Clean the tops of the magazine and the follower. And you can see I pick up a little bit. Depending on the quality of the ammo you've been shooting and how much you shot will determine just how dirty it gets. And you can clean the body of the magazine. Clean both your magazines. And clean as many magazines as you dirtied. In this case, the Glock 43 happens to come with 2, and we don't have any extras for it yet, so we just had the 2 magazines to clean. Now, I tend to clean the frame next, and you'll see it's kind of probably the light is a little bit good, but you'll see I picked up quite a bit of filth off of that magazine. We shot about 200 rounds through this gun today. I also tend to have a couple paper towels by the side. I've got one that I can put the spent patches on, and trying to keep my work area clear. And this work area, by the way, this is a fabric cutting mat from Jo-Ann Fabrics. It's impervious to solvents, it's a little bit rigid to protect the surface underneath, and it's really convenient and flat. I also keep a stack of paper towels for wiping my hands off. You want to keep your hands clean throughout the process so you don't just move dirt from one place to the other. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean the frame. So I'll just go through quickly and get the patch damp. You don't want the patch dripping wet, but you do want enough solvent on it that it can actually function. It's important to clean up into the magazine well. On a gun like this, you can see I can't really get my finger in there. So I'll take one of these cleaning rods and clean. What I'm doing is I'm going to go around the perimeter of the magazine well and clean the magazine well very well. And I'm also going to clean it from the top. Oops. Every once in a while patch will fall off. On the bigger frame guns you can actually just do it with your finger. It's a little bit easier to do it with your finger. And you can see I've already picked up some gunk that was in there. Then I usually clean the nose and inside the dust cover. That tends to not get all that dirty, but you will get some soot on this from firing it. And then you want to go ahead and clean the guides. So I usually take and hook with my finger, top and bottom, kind of hook the patch around the guide and clean it from the top and bottom, and then do that for each of the guides. And then clean the area in here where the trigger mechanism is, because that's right underneath the feed ramp, and that will get very sooty. And pretty much the easiest way to do that is by pushing the patch down into the magazine well with one finger, putting a little bit of tension on it and pulling it back up through there. There's a lot of nooks and crannies, and it's rather difficult to get your whole hand down in there. And you also want to clean the top of the trigger or sear mechanism. At this point, you take a look at it. If you see any accumulation of anything anywhere, go ahead and clean it out. and then you can set the frame aside. Now we'll go ahead and disassemble the slide and go ahead and clean that. So the first thing you want to do is remove the recoil spring. Most of the polymer pistols will have a captive recoil spring, but it's still under tension, so if you just flick it out of there, it may tend to fly a little bit. So you want to make sure you get a grip on it and just pull back a little bit towards the front of the slide, up, lift up, and then out, and you've got your recoil spring. You want to clean this. The easiest way to clean it is to pinch your thumb, your thumbnail into one of the threads. You treat it like a screw, and then just basically screw it through your thumb. Wipe off the ends and set it aside. Now, one thing you'll notice, I'm not replacing this patch every time it gets a little bit of soot on it, but take a look at it. When it starts to get where there's more dirty than clean, it's time to replace it. But one of the things I'll always do is I'll take this dirty patch before I go too much further and replace it, and I'll push it through the barrel. Because the initial pass through the barrel, you're going to pick up a lot of just powder, residue, and everything else, and the first pass you put through the barrel is going to be useless on the first try. And you can hook it through this, but I generally just lay it over the chamber, stick the rod into the middle of it, and just give it a shove. Push it through. And then discard it, and I'm going to get another patch. Exactly how many times you dip it, you'll get to the point where you'll decide how wet you want the patch. That's typically what I do. And now I'm going to go ahead and clean the slide. I'll take one corner of it and use that to wipe off the outer surface of the slide. You don't want to get the outer surface of the slide soaking wet, but you do want to get off any oil from your hands and powder residue that are on it. And pay attention to make sure you clean the barrel port and the recoil spring port, because this is the area of the gun that'll get filthied up from the residue when you fire it. And then go ahead and clean it. Now what you're going to want to clean in here, let me get a pick so that I can show. You're going to want to clean this area in here. You're going to want to clean the grooves, the slide grooves, which are along in here, and they run, most guns, they run the full length of the slide. You want to clean this area here as well as the extractor. You do want to be careful not to squeeze when you're doing it and squeeze solvent down into the firing pin hole. And you want to clean the barrel well area where the barrel sits. It's all in here. And it really doesn't matter what order you choose to do it in. Do it in whatever order kind of sees fit to you. I tend to clean the barrel well area first, just get it over with. Then I clean the back area. Then I'll go ahead and clean the extractor in this area, and then I'll clean the slide. So I'm going to go ahead and clean the barrel well. And you just basically run this damp patch back and forth along all the areas. I'm using my finger to sort of press it into the material to make sure that I get everywhere. You're wanting to get this as clean as possible, but this is not an operating room. You're not trying to get it absolutely perfectly clean. But you can see that I've got a little bit of shine in there from the solvent wet. I'm going to clean the back area here. The advantage also to cleaning the front first is it does squeeze any excess out, because you don't want to have any liquids or oil into the drain hole, if your gun has one, which the Glocks do, right there. And you don't want it to squeeze past the striker block. If this area gets filled with oil and solvent, it'll do two things. One, it can interfere with the operation of the firing pin just by itself, but it also will attract additional filth, because oil is an attractant for filth, and gum up the firing pin channel. So I'm going to clean this area. And basically you could see before I cleaned it, there was a bunch of residue, and you could see kind of all the gunk in there. And you could also see that the striker block was dull looking and covered in powder residue. And at this point the patch is time to be replaced. Now you can see that it's shiny and clean. And one thing I was going to mention, on a Glock, when you take a Glock apart, you'll notice that the striker, the firing pin, will protrude through the firing pin hole. That's not a defect, that's not a problem. You've pulled the trigger to take it apart, so the firing pin fired, and then you slid the slide off of the gun. When you go to put it back together again, it will pull back on the firing pin as part of the cycling, and it'll retract it. So you don't have to worry, it's not malfunctioning, it's not failed. Now once I've pulled back on the pin, I shouldn't be able to push it back forward, so I'm going to put just gentle pressure. You notice it won't go back forward. It won't make it all the way up through. And that's because the firing pin block is working. I'm going to go ahead and clean the rails. There's a couple different ways to do this. One way to do it is to use your fingernail and drive your fingernail in there and run it back and forth with your fingernail. Now some people may have a difficult time with that, or if you're going to clean a number of guns, that may get old fast. So the other way to do it is to take a pick, and this is kind of one of these catch-22s. You really want to avoid a steel pick because you don't want to scratch that area up, but these polymer picks don't last very long, but they're cheap. So you get a pack of like 3 or 4 of these for $4, and you'll go through a few of them and they'll eventually snap off. But you can take the polymer pick and set it in there and use it to drive back and forth, because you really want to get right down into that channel and get it clean. And you can see what I've pulled out of that channel. Now I can reuse this patch by just picking a different spot on it. And I'm going to do that for both channels until they're clean. So I'll take a quick second off camera here, or really on camera, but I'll focus on just getting it done. And I'm going to do the other side. You don't really need to go back through too many times if you get through there. You just want to get it so that you've gotten all of the dirt out. And at this point now, I've gotten all of the filth out of there. You can see what my patch looks like. It is a good idea after you've done that to take a clean patch, dampen it, and just go through one more time and just make sure that you got everything. See, I didn't get it all the first time, so I'm going to go back through. And of course, it's easier to do when you're not trying to show somebody, when you just go ahead and do it. Now you have a clean slide. The last part that you'll want to clean is the extractor claw and the breech face. So if you look right here, this is the extractor claw. And this hooks onto the round as it feeds it in, holds onto it throughout the cycle, and pulls it out of the chamber when it's done. And if you look in here and try to get where you can see it, you can see right here the claw sticks out and there's a gap. And that's where the round's going to slide up into. So try and turn it where you can see it. I'll just go through a couple different angles and you can see it right in there. So what we're going to do is take a patch, and I'm going to set this down. Take the patch, slide it in, up and under that, and either just pull it through or go back and forth. And what we're cleaning is under that extractor claw, as well as around the firing pin hole. And you can see how much dirt I took out of there. So I'll do that again with the cleaner side of the patch. Just put it down in there, and then just run it back and forth. And that time I think I got it clean that time, because very little extra came out. And over time you get buildup in there. You can have issues with failure to feed and failure to eject, as it interferes with the operation of the extractor claw and the picking up of another round. At this point we have a slide that's clean and ready to be oiled. Okay, now that the slide's clean, it's time to finish up with the barrel. Now we did run a damp patch through it to pick up a bunch of the initial stuff, and it's probably going to be next to impossible to show you this on camera, but I'm going to give it a try. If you look down in the barrel, which it's kind of very difficult to see on the camera, you can see there's a bunch of dry looking places, for lack of a better way to describe it. They're flat instead of shiny, and that's buildup of both powder residue and metal, could be copper, could be lead residue, and we need to get rid of all of that. So what I'm going to do with the barrel is I'm going to take a patch, get it damp, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean the outside of it. Clean the outside of the barrel, clean the barrel block, all three sides, and clean the feed ramp. And if you look at the feed ramp, you'll see it's, and again this is going to be tough on camera, but you see the feed ramp's kind of dull. And the reason it's dull, take a clean spot on here, there's a fairly clean spot, rub it across the feed ramp, you'll see it was actually quite dirty. And now you look at the feed ramp, now it's shiny because it's got solvent on it, but it's no longer dull, it's got kind of a nice sheen to it now. So you want to clean everything up in this area. You want to clean up under this block and the facing area. And then you want to clean right in here this notch, turn it sideways, where the pivot block is. Just by taking the patch, kind of balling it up and pulling it through. So I've cleaned the outside at this point. Now it's time to really properly clean the inside. So I'm going to take this damp patch again, push it through there. And my goal here is to get rid of as much of the loose powder residue that I possibly can before I go in there with my brush, to try to keep the brush as clean as possible. Now you can use the nylon brushes that come from Glock. What I find with these is they tend to be ineffective at removing any sort of metal deposits, lead and everything else. They'll come through and I'll run the brush through it just by pushing it in the end and then pushing it through. And then when I run a patch through, I'll pull off quite a bit of material, but eventually I'll get it to the point I can run this brush through it, run a patch through it, the patch will come clean. But if you look inside the barrel, you'll see there's still some residue. So I'm actually going to properly clean it by using a brass brush, which I showed you earlier. And I did check with Glock, you can use a brass brush in their barrels. There's no prohibition against it. But again, like I mentioned, get good quality brass brushes. When they start to get worn, get rid of them. And if you can get the brass core ones, and I'll put a link to these in the comments, the brass core ones are less likely to scratch anything. But I'll run that brush through. So stick it into the barrel and just push it straight through till it comes out. Now you can pull the brush back through again. The only thing you don't want to do is change directions while you're in the barrel. You can actually get it to jam if you do that. So you push the brush all the way out, pull it back through, and I'll go through a couple times. So I'm just closing my hand on the barrel when I go to pull so it comes through. And one of the things, I mentioned having a couple extra cleaning rods, that way I don't have to keep taking my brush off. Take another patch. Lay it on top of the barrel. Push it through. Then you'll see I got a kind of a star pattern of junk. I'll generally push this through twice, flipping it over. And you can kind of tell which way I just pushed it through based on which way it's dimpled out. You can see it's dimpled upward, which means the patch went through this way. So I'll flip it over and go through the other side of the patch. And then I'll go through another time with the brush. And I just run the same patch through until the patch starts to get too messed up to be useful. And then once I think I've got it clean, by looking down in there and not seeing any dry spots. It does sometimes help to take like a paper towel and make that the target you're looking at so you don't pick up the pattern of whatever the surface is. And this one here, now you can see it's shiny all the way through, and as I tilt it and I get the different shading and shadows, I don't see any dry or dull looking areas. So this barrel is nice and clean now. I'll run one more patch through it just to make sure that, you know, that dirty-ish patch that I put through it a couple times, that I'm not leaving any residue. And the patch actually comes through looking almost clean. So at this point, I now have a clean barrel. So it's time to oil this thing up and reassemble it. Now you can use any kind of good quality gun oil for the entire oiling process. I do choose to oil the parts that are being oiled for just rust protection with the outer as gun oil, and I tend to use this precision oiler for the things that are part of the actual moving parts. So I'll start with taking this, putting a few drops on the outside of the barrel, and just with a curled finger oiling up the outside of the barrel and the barrel block. Now one thing you'll notice that I'm not oiling is I'm not oiling the feed ramp, the chamber, or anything like that. You really don't want to get oil on the feed ramp or down into the chamber. On some older rifles, people will recommend running an oil patch through it, but you really want to keep the barrel and chamber clear of any kind of contaminant, because that can cause excessive pressures. So the inside of the barrel and the chamber, you want to keep clean. So I'm not putting any oil on that area, just on this for mostly aesthetics and rust protection. And for those that might not be familiar with all of the various terms associated with firearms, what I'm looking at in my hand that might be called the barrel is actually two components that are actually attached together. The chamber is this front part of the barrel, and you can see that there's a ridge in there. So there's one part that's a bigger diameter than the other. That's the chamber. So that's the part that houses the cartridge. As the cartridge goes in, it holds the cartridge in place, and the bullet, the projectile, will stick forward into the barrel. And when you look at this, you'll see that the chamber is smooth, and then when you look a little further past that ridge, which is now you're into actually the barrel itself, you'll see the rifling. So that's the difference. In those two areas you do not want to oil. So now I have the cosmetic oil and the rust protection oil. I'm going to put a drop of oil in this area where the pivot block works. Now we are going to be discussing drops of oil. You don't want to, most guns do not need to be wet. You just want to have a drop of oil, and with this precision oiler, which I can get it into the screen, this happens to be a plastic tip, but it allows you to put a drop of oil. So I'm just going to reach in there and put a drop of oil in there and spread it around a little bit with the tip, and you may not even be able to see other than a little bit of a shiny residue. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set the barrel aside. Most of the time when I set the barrel aside, I'll set it up on its nose so that the oil I put into the pivot block area can spread around in there and not just run off from one side. If you get a barrel that won't stand up, or if your surface isn't smooth, that's not absolutely necessary, but that's generally what I do with it. Now let's go ahead and oil the slide. And what I'm going to oil on the slide are these rails, which are these grooves right here. And there's a number of different ways you can do this, but what I tend to like to do is to take the precision oiler, and I'll put a drop at the back, a drop at the middle, and a drop up at the front in that groove. And then I'll use a square pick like this to spread it. That way I can make sure I've got an even distribution, I've got a nice thin film of oil. You don't want it dripping wet. If I've put too much in there, I'll see it, and I can dab some of it out with a patch. And if I've put too little and I've got a dry spot, I know I need to add just a bit more. So I'll take the precision oiler, and this is going to be rather difficult to show on screen because of everything being dark, but I'm going to put a drop at the back, a drop in the middle, and a drop at the front. And let's see if I can get it where you can see it. You can see a little bit of shiny up here at the front, and it's a little shiny in the middle, and a little shiny at the back. And I'm just going to take this square plastic pick, and I'm just going to run it back and forth in that groove. It's going to end up into that oil and spread it through the slide. And now when I look, you see you've kind of got a sheen all the way across, and again, some of this stuff isn't the easiest thing to show. If I tilt it, you'll see different areas where it sheens a little bit. And I've got a nice thin film of oil through there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Drop one drop at each position. Spread with the pick. And I don't know if that side will be, yeah, now this side's actually a little bit easier to see. You can see a little bit of the sheen, but there's no pooling. And there's a little bit of a pool here at the back, so I didn't get all the way to the front and the back. Now you can use a toothpick to do this, but you're going to find a polymer pick like this, it's going to be a lot easier to do, because a toothpick's got a, just a single point that you're going to try to stick in there and run back and forth. You're going to have a little bit more trouble with a toothpick. The polymer pick with this flat piece actually will just kind of just lays right in there and gives you a nice solid surface, but because it's polymer, it's not going to scratch anything. So now I have oiled the slide, and again I mentioned earlier, but I'll reiterate, you don't want to oil any of the components up in here. On some newer 40 caliber Glocks, when the gun's relatively new, you may find that it's difficult to chamber the first round. It's hard to pull the slide back, and you can put a drop of oil on this ramp and spread it with your finger, but I would put the oil back in this area, kind of in the center of it, and then spread it with my finger. But that'll even become unnecessary after you've cycled the gun a few times and the magazine's seated in. I've only encountered that on the 40s. Now, all the others, there's no reason to oil that area. Now let's go ahead and reassemble the slide. So I'm going to take my barrel with the pivot block facing up, slide it into the slide, and drop it in place, and it'll just drop right in there. Reassemble the recoil spring, and the larger end goes towards the front of the gun. Just put it into the hole, and what we're going to try to do here is there's a little groove. If I can get this where you can see it. I'm going to take this off for a second. You see this little well right about here, that little half moon shaped well with a ledge on it. That's where this thing sits. So you put it in there, push it forward with your thumb a little bit to get it in front of that, and then drop it in place. And you want to just check to make sure it's centered. It should pretty much self-center. You just put your thumb on it, kind of give it a little wiggle, and it's centered. You've now got an assembled slide. Now there are a couple oiling points on the frame. So I've got the frame, and what I'm going to oil are the guides. Just, two at the back, one on each side. Two at the front, one on each side. And then I tend to put a drop of oil right here because this is where the pivot block actually hits. And I'm going to use that same precision oiler to just put a drop on the guide, and now you'll see there's just a bit of a sheen, and I spread it around a little bit with the tip of the oiler. Do the same on the other side. The front guide. And one on the pivot block. You'll see just a little bit of a kind of a sheen of oil. That's all you need to oil on a Glock. You don't necessarily need to oil the trigger mechanism. You don't need to oil the ejector, which is right here. That's just a little pin that pops the shell out. And The trigger bar, which runs alongside the slide, is pretty much free, so there's no reason to lubricate or oil that. And now it's time to assemble the slide back onto the frame. So the Glocks and most all of the polymer pistols are very similar in that you can see the back of the grooves. Get it just the right angle right there. You can see the slide grooves in the slide. Just going to line those up with the guides and then slide the slide back. Pull it all the way back, let it forward. At this point the gun is effectively reassembled. You see, I can pull it all the way back and it cycles properly, goes into battery, and we do know that it's still empty, of course. The trigger will function. The last step of this is to protect the sheen of the outside. Now in some of the older Tennifer Glocks, this actually didn't really even need to be oiled. It had a sheen right from the factory. The newer ones, since they've abandoned Tennifer, it will be a little bit dull and it could use a little bit of oil for protection. This is the point where you switch back to, if you're going to use the Teflon precision oiler, you switch back to any conventional gun oil. And the easiest way to do this is to just put a drop, and these are kind of fat drops, a few fat drops on the slide, and then take a patch and use that patch to wipe that oil and spread it around the entire slide. And what you're doing is you're creating a little bit of a rust protection, and you're protecting the finish and give it a little bit of sheen. So I'll just spread it around. I will put a little bit on the front. And if you find out that you've got a little bit too much oil residue, then just take a dry patch and wipe it one more time with a dry patch, and that would absorb any excess that you might have gotten on there. But what you're looking for is just kind of a nice sheen like that, where it's not dripping with oil, but it is well protected and looks nice. Now with a reasonable amount of oil line like that, there's still no difficulty grabbing a hold of the slide and cycling it. And you now have a clean Glock that's your time to load it back up, go back to the range, and get it dirty again. If you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, and have a great day.